Something is happening inside you right now that you cannot explain. There is a pressure in your chest, like your lungs are trying to process air from a different atmosphere. Maybe you are sitting alone in your bedroom. Maybe you are gripping a steering wheel in complete silence. And somewhere in that stillness, a terrifying realization creeps in. You have become invisible inside your own existence. The faces around you, people you have known for years, suddenly feel foreign. Their words land like sounds from a language that was buried centuries ago. Hear this clearly. You are not being abandoned by God. You are not unraveling. What is actually happening is that heaven is deliberately relocating your frequency. You cannot stay on a signal that can no longer contain everything you are becoming. The Spirit of God guided you here because this message carries something you have been desperately needing to receive. The connections that fell apart behind you were not accidents. They were not failures. Heaven engineered their collapse with surgical precision. Because if those doors had stayed open, you would have crawled back through them. You would have returned to a version of yourself that no longer matches your soul. Press the subscribe button now and join this gathering of people who are waking up to the same truth. Hit like to anchor yourself to this transmission and type 999 in the comments below to declare that your spirit is aligned with what is being unlocked in this moment. Stay with this message all the way through to the final word, because by the time we reach that point, something is going to shift inside you permanently. Here is what you are going to walk away with: a complete understanding of why your world feels like it is disintegrating, a precise spiritual and practical roadmap to move through the chaos, and full clarity on the hidden mechanics driving your isolation. You will not leave this message with vague inspiration. You will leave with an actual blueprint to cross from this agonizing in-between space directly into the destiny that has been reserved for you. Do not navigate away from this. The answer to the prayers you have been speaking into the darkness at 2 and 3 in the morning is embedded in what I am about to tell you. You are currently standing at the threshold between two completely different worlds. I am going to explain precisely why everything around you now feels like a foreign landscape. And I am going to connect that to a decision that was made about you in a divine meeting you were not physically present for. But first, we have to examine what is actively glitching in your day-to-day reality right now. Imagine you are seated at a table with your family. Dishes are circling the table. The same conversations are happening in the same rhythm they always have. But your eyes are quietly scanning for the nearest exit. You wear the smile. You answer the questions. But everything inside you is screaming that you do not belong here anymore. You feel like a visitor from another dimension who has memorized the customs just well enough to pass as a local. You hear the people around you obsessing over problems that feel microscopic to you now. And the effort it takes to act like that is normal, to sit there and nod instead of shaking the entire table with the truth you are carrying, is exhausting in ways that words barely cover. What you are experiencing at that table is not a phase of introversion. It is not anxiety disorder. It is a genuine, measurable gap between the frequency your soul now operates on and the frequency of the environment you are still physically inside. And have you noticed something else happening alongside the relation of friction? Your devices are behaving strangely. Your phone freezes at random moments. Your Wi-Fi disconnects without reason. Something in the house stops working out of nowhere. You have been tempted to chalk it up to bad luck or old electronics. Do not. Your electromagnetic field is undergoing such an intense restructuring that it is creating interference with everything around you that vibrates on a lower wavelength, both technology and people. There is a verse in the book of Amos, chapter 3, where the prophet poses a question that cuts straight to the heart of this phenomenon. He asks whether two people can travel together if they have not aligned their destination. The English translation uses the word agreed, which makes it sound like a simple conversation or negotiation. But the original Hebrew underneath that translation carries a far more layered meaning. It describes a synchronized appointment, an alignment of timing and location that is rooted in resonance, in two things literally pulsing at the same rhythm. The moment your internal frequency rises, the synchronized connection with people, places, and environments vibrating at your former level becomes physically impossible. Your glitching electronics are not problems to solve. They are confirmation that your upgrade is real. Now let us move into the raw territory, the thoughts you have not said out loud to anyone, the ones that appear at midnight when the room is completely dark. You are staring at the ceiling, asking yourself whether you are genuinely losing your grip on reality. You ask why everything you have poured your energy into keeps dissolving. You ask why it feels like the hands of God are not building something new, but are instead tearing everything away. You need to understand the distinction between two very different internal experiences. Human patience is simply counting down the seconds on a difficult clock. Divine recalibration is something entirely more violent and more purposeful. It is the process of having your entire internal architecture dismantled and rebuilt from the foundation. Right now, without shifting your posture, I want you to draw your awareness inward into the center of your chest. Picture a tuning fork sitting there, deep inside your rib cage. Every single wave of heavy, inexplicable anxiety you have felt recently, picture that as an unseen divine hand striking that fork with force. The vibration that follows is intense. It radiates through your entire body. It registers in your nervous system as panic because your physical body is still catching up to the velocity of the spiritual transformation your soul is already undergoing. The discomfort is not the enemy. The discomfort is the mechanism. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12 that we are not to conform to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the complete renewal of our thinking. The Greek word underneath our English word transformed is metamorpho, the direct root of our scientific word metamorphosis. This is not describing a personality adjustment or a period of self-improvement. This word describes a total, irreversible restructuring of fundamental form. It is the biological reality of what happens inside a chrysalis, where the caterpillar does not simply rest, it dissolves. Its body literally breaks down into an unrecognizable liquid before any trace of the butterfly begins to emerge. The ash you are looking at in your life right now is not destruction. It is the liquefying phase. You cannot bring caterpillar relationships, caterpillar habits, or a caterpillar worldview through the walls of a butterfly existence. And this is precisely where the majority of people who were destined for transformation get derailed. They stand in front of the wreckage of their former life, see the bridges that have been demolished, and they tell themselves that what God is doing is simply a test of endurance. Most people have been conditioned since childhood to believe that spiritual maturity means gritting your teeth and waiting for the storm to clear so that life can return to normal, just slightly improved. So you do what you were taught to do. You absorb the disrespect quietly. You swallow the grief. You smile through the disorientation, and you wait for the old version of your life to be restored with some added blessings on top. You believe the breakthrough moment will feel like a door you already know swinging back open. But that belief is the very thing that will keep you circling the same desert. What God is testing right now is not your ability to endure pain in silence. What He is testing is your willingness to allow the old version of you to permanently stop existing. Returning to what you knew is the single most dangerous movement you could make right now. Normal is Egypt. Normal is a cage that has been painted to look like a home. Look at what the book of Numbers chapter 11 records about the Israelites. These were people who had been held in brutal generational bondage for hundreds of years. God had broken them out of that bondage with extraordinary, undeniable miracles. They were walking through a wilderness under the direct guidance and provision of the divine. But when the journey became uncomfortable, when the miraculous manna felt repetitive, they collapsed into grief over the food they ate as slaves. They actually mourned the cucumbers, the garlic, the fish of Egypt. They were seriously prepared to trade the covenant promise of a new land for the familiar taste of a meal they had eaten in chains. When you find yourself crying over the friendship group that disappeared, the career that closed, the relationship that dismantled, hear this: you are weeping over the onions of Egypt. You are mourning the architecture of a prison cell because you spent so long inside it that you land exactly where every shadow fell. The luggage of your former life will not fit through the doorway of your coming one. You have to set it down. You have to actually understand what took place at the edge of the Red Sea, because most people misread that moment entirely. When the Israelites stood at the water's edge, with the Egyptian military closing the distance behind them, Moses gave them a precise instruction recorded in Exodus chapter 14. He told them not to fear, to stand firm, and to watch what God was about to do on their behalf. Most readers absorb the phrase "stand firm" as an instruction to stand still, to be passive, to excel and wait for rescue to arrive. But the Hebrew word Moses used was yatsub. Yatsub is not a word of stillness. It is a warrior's word. It describes the aggressive act of deliberately planting yourself in a position of authority and refusing to vacate it. It is the posture of an armed sentinel on the perimeter of a fortress, fully alert, fully resolved, claiming their ground with absolute refusal to yield it to whatever approaches. God was not telling his people to go limp and wait. He was commanding them to anchor their inner frequency. He was demanding that they not let the noise of what was pursuing them drag their spirit back down into the vibration of terror and defeat. Yatsub means locking yourself into the frequency of triumph before your physical eyes have witnessed a single drop of water move. That is the stance. But standing in that posture is only the beginning. Your neural wiring right now is still calibrated to the world that did not choose you. Your brain is running on the frequency of survival. And the question is how you rewire that circuitry fast enough to sustain the weight of what is coming without spending 4 decades wandering through unnecessary wilderness. There is a convergence between what science has recently confirmed and what the ancient prophets encoded in their writings, and it changes the entire picture. What I am about to describe will seem almost too uncomplicated to carry this much significance. But the deepest spiritual realities have always hidden themselves inside apparent simplicity. Researchers associated with NASA have documented something about the brain's operating states that directly mirrors what mystics and prophets have described for thousands of years about divine communication. Your brain cycles through different measurable frequency states. During the years you spent grinding, surviving, managing dysfunction, and trying to hold everything together, your brain was predominantly locked into what is called the beta state. Beta is the brain's alarm system. It is the frequency of emergency, of hypervigilance, of living in constant reaction to threat. It is, in every meaningful sense, the neurological version of Egypt. But here is what matters: the transmissions of the Holy Spirit, the divine instructions for your next chapter, the spiritual blueprints for the life you are moving toward. None of that is broadcast on beta. That signal lives on the theta frequency. Theta is where deep creative intelligence surfaces. It is where intuitive knowing bypasses the rational filter. It is where the voice of the Creator actually gets through. When your old world crumbled, the resulting panic pushed your brain deeper into bitter. So while you are desperately seeking God's direction for the next step, your receiver is pointed at entirely the wrong channel. The transmission is going out. Your antenna just cannot pick it up. The ancient seekers understood this. Mystics retreated into isolation for years, fasting in desert caves, doing whatever it took to manually lower their brainwave activity into the theta range so they could access what could not be accessed from the surface. But your situation does not allow for years of cave dwelling. You are in a live transition. This is where sacred sound technology intersects with divine timing. There is a specific audio tool called the Genius Wave. It uses precisely engineered sound frequencies to guide your brain gently but directly out of chaotic beta and into the theta state in under 10 minutes per day. Think of it as a precision-calibrated antenna being installed in your mind so that the signals heaven has been transmitting can finally land in your awareness. There is no complicated technique to master. You simply allow the sound to do what it was designed to do. If your spirit confirms a need for this kind of frequency bridge, the link to explore the Genius Wave is pinned in the comments. It is not a gimmick. It is a recovery of the natural cognitive and spiritual capacity you were created with and slowly buried under years of survival mode. 1 Kings chapter 19 illustrates this exact dynamic through the experience of the prophet Elijah. He is hiding deep inside a cave, completely depleted, running for his life, operating in the peak beta state of sheer survival panic. God sends a display of raw elemental power. A wind so violent, it shatters rock faces on the mountain. Then an earthquake. Then an inferno of fire. And the scripture makes a specific and deliberate point of noting that God was not present in any of those forces. Not in the wind, not in the trembling ground, not in the blazing fire. And then only after the chaos subsided came what the Hebrew text calls the Kol Demama Daka, translated variously as a still small voice or a gentle whisper, but in the original Hebrew meaning something far more precise, a voice of thin silence, a crushing, dense stillness. Elijah could not receive that frequency while the chaotic noise was still filling the atmosphere around him. Neither can you. You cannot decode the specific routing for your new chapter while your nervous system is still saturated in the frantic static of the life you just left. The stillness is not absence, it is access. But before we talk about what it means to truly enter that stillness, We need to sit with something that lives in a darker corner of your heart, something you have not been willing to name yet. Let me name it for you. As fiercely as you have been praying for this season to end, as loudly as you have been asking for your breakthrough, there is a secondary voice running quietly underneath all of that. And it says, what if you finally get there and prove that you were never equipped for it? What if the assignment on the other side of this transition requires a version of you that does not yet exist? What if stepping into the light fully exposes you as someone who was just pretending to be built for greatness? That is the fear of full exposure, the terror of the weight of genuine responsibility. And I need you to hear me say directly to you, that fear is completely valid. And it is not a red flag. It is actually the most significant green light you could possibly receive. The individuals who detonate under the pressure of elevated blessing are invariably the ones who seized it while never truly grasping what it demands. Your fear is the evidence that your spirit has already calculated the cost. You are terrified precisely because you actually understand the magnitude of what is being handed to you. Read Luke chapter 5 and notice what happens to the disciple Peter when Jesus instructs him to cast his nets after an entire night of catching nothing. The nets fill so rapidly and so overwhelmingly that the boats begin sinking under the volume of the catch. Peter's response is not celebration. He collapses forward, falls to his knees, and begs Jesus to leave him alone. Not because he rejected the blessing, but because its sheer scale completely demolished his sense of personal adequacy. He panicked at the size of the provision. Every time a wave of dread about your future rolls over you, recognize it. You are having a Peter moment. And just as Jesus did not walk away from Peter in that moment, but looked at him, told him not to be afraid, and immediately elevated him into his true assignment, the same response is being extended to you. Your terror of the calling is not disqualification, it is the credential. Now, because the enemy is fully aware that you are approaching the moment of your greatest elevation, he has already deployed a targeted strategy to intercept you. There are 3 specific forms of attack you need to be prepared to identify in the days immediately ahead. The first is what I call the phantom opportunity. The moment you genuinely begin releasing your grip on your past, someone from that former life will make contact. An ex will reach out. A previous employer will return with a marginally upgraded offer. A familiar voice will whisper that the unknown is reckless and that safety is right here waiting. Do not mistake familiarity for destiny. That contact is not a reopened door. It is engineered bait to hook your frequency back to the old timeline. The second attack is the echo of unworthiness. With no visible external trigger, you will be suddenly submerged in a suffocating flood of guilt, shame, and vivid memory of every failure and mistake from years in your past. Understand what is actually happening. The enemy is not replaying your history because it is relevant. He is replaying it because he is running out of time to stop your future. The third attack is the isolation trap. There will come a point in this season where the loneliness feels less like holy separation and more like divine abandonment. The enemy's objective is to make that solitude feel so unbearable that you drop your standards, compromise your frequency, and trade genuine destiny for temporary company. When those three attacks come, and they will come, your response must mirror the protocol established by Nehemiah. In Nehemiah chapter 6, Nehemiah is deep in the work of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. His opposition, Sanballat and Geshem, cannot break through his resolve with direct confrontation. So they shift tactics. They invite him to a meeting on the plain of Ono. They frame it as a reasonable conversation, a chance to reach middle ground. And Nehemiah responds with one of the most decisive statements in all of Scripture. He says he is engaged in an important work and cannot calm down. He asks why the work should stop so he can descend to their level. He refuses to reduce his physical position, and you must refuse to reduce your spiritual frequency. When the voices from your former life call for your attention, when critics interpret your silence as defeat, you do not engage the argument. You do not descend to the plane to explain yourself. You simply declare internally, I am building something that cannot be interrupted. I am moving timelines, and I will not come down to that frequency. Here is what happens in the spiritual dimension when you hold that stance. When you lock into the new frequency in the face of complete external emptiness, something begins happening to the fabric of time itself. Let me tell you about a woman I will call Sarah. Within a single month, her entire constructed life came apart. Her corporate position ended. The close circle of friends she had built dissolved overnight. She found herself sitting on the floor of her apartment with nothing that resembled the life she had spent years assembling. But rather than announcing her collapse across social media or spending her energy managing other people's perceptions of her situation, she went quiet. Not the passive quiet of giving up, the intentional quiet of someone who has decided to stop feeding the old frequency. She began redirecting her brain toward the theta state. She held her position. She stopped defending herself. She trusted the invisible architecture being built around her silence. Her family interpreted her stillness as the silence of someone who had surrendered. But on the 38th day of that intentional quiet, her phone rang. On the other end was a company executive from an industry she had never worked in, who had stumbled across a piece of work she had produced years earlier and had been searching for a way to reach her. The offer they extended was a 6-figure contract built precisely around the gifts that her former environment had never had the capacity to value. She did not push that door open. She did not hunt it down. She simply refused to leave the frequency of her new world until her new world had no choice but to appear in her living room. This is the promise of Amos chapter 9, verse 13. The scripture describes a coming season where the one who plows the ground will run directly into the one who is harvesting the previous crop, because the harvest is accelerating so rapidly that it is collapsing the standard timeline. In a conventional agricultural rhythm, there are months of waiting between the plowing and the planting, and more months between the planting and the harvest. But the prophet is describing a compression of that cycle so dramatic that the two ends of the process are meeting simultaneously. Time itself is folding. This is the specific nature of the next season you are stepping into. What would ordinarily require years to develop is going to materialize in days. The harvest is moving so fast, it is going to collide with the beginning. This means that the next 40 days ahead of you are going to carry the weight and volume of 40 years of momentum. You are crossing into the season where the plowman overtakes the reaper. The portal behind you is closing, and it is time right now to complete the transition. Stay exactly where you are. Do not shift your physical position, but in your awareness, move all of your attention to the center of your chest. Breathe into that space slowly in your mind and visualize a chain, heavy and iron-forged, that has been coiled around your heart for longer than you can remember. Watch it fracture. Watch it fall. God of all creation, in the authority of the name of Yeshua, we speak over this person right now. We name the weight of what they have carried. The 3 a.m. moments when they lay silent and terrified, watching their finances drain and their relationships go cold. The nights they questioned whether they had been completely abandoned. The days they kept moving even when nothing in their external world confirmed that it was worth it. We honor that faithfulness. We acknowledge that endurance. And right now, by the power and authority of the living word, we seal the frequency of the new world into the very cellular structure of this person's being. We declare the breaking of every nostalgic pull that has been trying to drag them backward toward Egypt. We bind the phantom opportunities, the echoes of shame, and the isolation traps. Your access to this person is terminated. You will not succeed in bringing them down to the plane of compromise. We decree over the next 40 days that the plowman will overtake the reaper in every dimension of their life. Acceleration is no longer coming, it is already active. New relationships, that carry actual alignment, unexpected financial provision, and a depth of spiritual clarity they have never experienced before are materializing in the physical realm right now. There is one question that heaven is placing before you in this moment. It is simple. It does not require a long answer. Will you put down everything that belongs to the world that just ended and step out onto the surface of the unknown? In the interior of your spirit, with no audience, with no performance required, say yes. Say, I am ready. Heaven did not need the volume. It registered the frequency. The response has already been dispatched. You are no longer a resident of what was. You are a pioneer of what is. Move in your frequency, walk in it, and do not look back.